Hello, my name is Nadine and welcome to Hop Along Studio. So in today's video, I want to talk about how we use objects to help with our self-care. So do you have an object that helps you with your self-care? I definitely do. Mine is my fountain pen. Might be a strange thing to say a fountain pen helps with self-care, but considering that I am a journaler and I am also an art journaler and an artist, for me a pen has a large impact on how I create and how I express myself. In my collection, I have an assortment of pens. The fountain pen is one of my favorites. I like it because of the nibs. They allow me to have a lot more variation in my mark making, but I also believe that a variety of pens helps us to be able to create in a little bit more versatile manner. It really does change up how we do mark making, and that can be a huge difference on how we express ourselves in our art. I've always loved stationery. For me, pens, great paper, paper clips, all of that has been very important for me as I find ways to journal and find ways to express how I'm feeling. So for me, a pen is a huge part of my self-care. It helps me to get thoughts down. I don't ever really journal on a computer. I always journal in a book. And that for me has been a huge part of actually getting my ideas out, getting my thoughts out, being able to leave things on the paper and be able to move on from them. And so the pen for me is a really important tool for that self-expression. A pen can really help you improve your writing. I notice on the internet, especially looking at other creatives and especially other art journals and scrapbookers, is that a lot of people mention how much they hate their own writing. And I'll be honest, I'm one of those people as well. I have always been very self-conscious about my writing. The way I was taught to write as a child was a little bit incorrect. And because of that, it's always made me very self-conscious because people have always commented that my writing isn't as perfect as it could be. And so I've really had to put some effort in as an adult to try to improve my writing in a way that makes it more legible, that makes it clear to read and understand. And a fountain pen for me has been a really great part of adding to that practice. What does a fountain pen do for me? It basically, with the size of the nib, the way you have to position your hand, the ergonomics of it, it actually forces me to have a much cleaner writing style. It forces me to be less rushed when I write. And because of that, it's been able to help me practice some of these little exercises to help me improve my writing so that I'm really happy with it. And so it's something to be said if you are self-conscious about your writing, or like me as a child, you weren't really taught to write correctly. It's one of those things that can make a big difference in how you view your writing, how you view your words, and how you're willing to present it to the world. So I found when I was working in an office, so often my pens would go missing. Sometimes every couple of weeks I'd be putting another dozen pens on my desk just because somebody would want to write something down and would walk away with the pen. It wasn't really an issue, but after a while it got tiring. So eventually I got my own fountain pen to be just my pen for the office. One of the positive things about that is because no one knows how to use a fountain pen anymore. No one stole my pen, and it was good because it was my pen to use. Everyone knew what my markups were, and every time I needed to sign documents, it was always very clear which signature was mine. And so for me, being able to just express myself at work, the pen was one way that I could do that. The other thing to consider is that during a time of pandemic where we have to be so careful about not sharing things and disinfecting things, by having your own pen, that's a way of protecting yourself. When everyone knows that that's your pen, it looks very different from everyone else's and is a reusable pen with cartridges, most people will leave it alone. And that way, in a sense, you can protect yourself during this pandemic to make sure you're only having a pen that you use. So my favorite pen is definitely the fountain pen. I actually started using a fountain pen as a child. My parents gave me a calligraphy set for Christmas one year, and I spent a lot of time learning how to write beautiful letters. And because of that, I have to say I've always been attracted to the fountain pen. A few years ago, I actually pulled that old set that I got as a child out of a box, and the ink was still good and the pen was still working, so I actually started using it again. And it took me down a road of really wanting to improve my writing and wanting to learn these new calligraphy styles again. And so as I went on, I realized that I wanted maybe a better quality pen, and I started doing some research. There are a lot of pens out on the market, and I wanted something that wasn't too expensive because you can spend thousands of dollars on a calligraphy pen. You can also spend $20 on a calligraphy pen. And the biggest thing is I wanted something that I could refill. I wanted something that would be high quality and that would work well. Because when you're loading your own ink into pens, if it's not a well-designed pen, it can be extremely frustrating. So the Lamy Safari fountain pens, this is the very first one I got. I've recently gotten more of these pens. I actually have 4 pens at the moment, and I love the ones with the metal barrel. I love the sheen of them. These actually come in a lot of different colors, and they keep changing the colors up. So I love about these pens is they're made in Germany. They're made to very high quality. They have this wonderful clip that allows you to secure them to things so that you do not lose them. They're made of metal, the clips themselves, so it's a very, very well made and well designed pen. As well, they also have little ergonomic grips on them, which makes it very easy for you to hold them in your hand and to find a comfortable place for you to be able to write for a long period of time. They also come with these cartridges that you can put in. You can also get something called a converter that you can actually pull ink from an ink bottle and put into these pens as well. And so they're actually very well designed. They come with a few different tips. This one has a little bit of a ball tip, and because of that, these ones come from everything from fine to extra broad. And then you also can move up to what's called a calligraphy nib, which they're actually, instead of having the little ball at the end to help the ink flow, they are actually with a chisel tip. And that chisel tip allows you to get those really flowing calligraphy styles in your writing. So I'm actually just going to provide you a close-up of these pens so you can actually see how they write and see what the difference between these nibs are. So I want to show you these pen nibs. So this one's a fine Lamy Safari pen nib. You'll notice there's a tiny little ball head at the end here. That's what's actually going to give you a really consistent flow of ink for this particular style of head. So basically with this nib, you'll notice if I write sideways or up and down, there's not a lot of variation in your strokes. It's very similar in both directions. So that when you're actually writing with this, you'll notice that there isn't a lot of variation. It's very great for journaling and for doing something you want a very consistent line thickness for. So this is a 1.1 calligraphy nib. You'll notice it has a very square point on it, which makes it really consistent. So there is no real ball at the end. It's more of just a chip style. And so when you write with this one, you'll notice if you write in this direction versus this direction, you're going to get the variation in strokes. So especially if you're not a huge fan of your writing, by having some variation in stroke, it's a little bit more forgiving. And so it's like you end up getting a little bit of that lovely variation as you write. So the third nib I wanted to show you was my 1.5 calligraphy nib. These also come in a slightly thicker nib as well, but again, they all kind of have different thicknesses and they all do slightly different things. So this one also is a calligraphy nib, so you can tell you get nice thick strokes and very thin side strokes, so that when you're writing with this one, or your handwriting, you start getting that really nice variation. And so that's something to be said about. It depends on how big you want to write, how you want to write, and which nib actually works the best for you. So for me, I found that I usually stick with the fine ones for writing in my journals, and I use a calligraphy one a lot for my art. And sometimes I also use that 1.1 a calligraphy nib as well. My husband happens to really like the 1.1 calligraphy nib, so I usually leave those ones for his pens. And that's another nice thing about these pens, is these nibs are interchangeable. So if I have a nib on my pen that I don't like anymore, I trade it with my husband and vice versa. So we've been able to really customize these pens in a ways that really works for us. So when I started using fountain pens, I always thought they were just something to be used for doing calligraphy styles, for actually writing, and only writing in much more formal ways. But one thing I realized that with all the variation in the nibs for calligraphy pens, and especially for these Lamy pens, is that you can have things that you are expected to write with on a regular basis. Like I almost always use my Lamy pens now. I almost never use a traditional like Bic or roller ball pen anymore. I actually enjoy the tactile experience of writing with these pens so much that I'm not actually willing to write with many other pens anymore. But what's also nice about them is they're really great for art. I do a lot of pen and ink drawings. I do a lot of work in sketching, and I find that the level of detail that you can get with them, as well as the thinness and thickness of these strokes, especially with the calligraphy nibs, makes a big difference in how my work finally turns out. So for me, it's a huge personal choice for how I am going to create in my art as well as creating in my journals. The other thing I love about the Lamy pens is that I almost never use just straight black ink. I always usually use ink of a color, whether that's a blue-black ink, whether that is a red ink, a purple ink. I actually use quite a variation of colors when I am using my fountain pens. Often the cartridges will look like this. They actually are preloaded with ink, and you can get these for the Lamy pens that are basically cartridges you just insert into your pen and off you go. There are also these objects. These are called converters. So basically they have a little plunger, and you basically add your ink and you pull your ink in, and then you basically put it in your pen. So it's a way of being able to use non-Lamy ink in your fountain pen. So for example, this particular ink, you can see at the bottom, there's a whole whack of gold flake in there. And so basically the gold flake, if I shake this and then I draw it up onto my pen, I have a turquoise ink with gold flake in it. And so again, you can get into some very customized inks when you're working with these pens. And so for me, this is all part of the creative process. This is all part of the self-care of having a great pen. It means that if I feel like writing with turquoise with gold flake in my journal, I can. It means that I can really explore ways that this pen brings me self-care in my life. So how does the pen help with self-care? In a time of disposable pens, it seems like a strange thing to say that a pen can bring self-care. But for me, I believe that working with a pen allows us to slow down. But by forcing ourselves just to write on a piece of paper over just typing away on a computer, just forces the pace to slow down. It helps us to be thoughtful. It helps us to be in the moment. For me, working with pens is a very physical experience. By the flow of the ink, the stroke barks, everything about it is a way to kind of bring these moments of quiet, of peace, of just slowing down the pace enough to really enjoy the experience of writing. So I find very tactile things like pens can help me during times of stress. I know for me, I was in a lot of stressful situations in my previous job, and I often found that when I was stressed, I would doodle. I would doodle in meetings. It was a way of trying to deal with the tension around me, to be able to just write or practice strokes and be able to just really start bringing myself to a place of calm and centeredness. And when things are great in our lives, when we have these wonderful moments of relaxation, I believe the pen can really help with that as well. By being able to express your art, by finding ways to use strokes to show different mark making, it's amazingly therapeutic exercise. And so for me, a pen, the tactile pen, a good pen, makes a big difference in how I stay centered and how I stay creative. So do you have objects that help you with your self-care practice? If you do, I'd love to hear about it. I hope you've really enjoyed this video. If you have, if you could like it, subscribe to my channel, and maybe provide a comment below about what you use to have self-care in your own life. As well, I have my website, hopalongstudio.com, where I have other ideas on how we can find self-care in our own personal lives. I hope you have a really great week, and I will see you next time.